Hey, what's up, guys? So after playing that Skeeter Soft game today and thinking a little bit more about park factors and OOTP and some of the discussions we've had, the big question I have for you is it really worth it for a game to have park factors? There are I would say that most of the baseball games that are on the market are at least complex enough to offer the option, right? I think about Replay, I think about Dynasty League Baseball, I think about Strat-O-Matic. I know that APBA has at least some sort of park factor option these days. I'm pretty sure that just about every major game on the market at least pays some lip service to park factors. But the big question that I have is it really worth it? Does it really mean anything, right? Are we talking about something that's actually significant, right? Yesterday I showed you that in Diamond Mine Baseball, for example, you've got the righty-lefty delineated park factors, which is an interesting idea. And yeah, I mean, it certainly is the case that your, say, your right field fences are going to be shaped different than the left field fences. And I mean, certainly, even with a batter's eye out there, the view from the right-handed batter box is going to be different than the view from the left-handed batter box. But the question that I have is that really worth it? Are we really measuring like anything that's actually like, worthwhile or that is believable or that has anything to do with, what we should be measuring in game? It's a very perilous road to go down, which is one of the reasons why I think Bill Stafford never really went down that road. The reason why it's so perilous and it's so dangerous is because, if you get it wrong, you can create huge distortions in your game and in your engine, especially for people who are trying to create replays, right? The trick about park factors is that in the end, they have to sort of balance each other out. You can't have a park factor for a park that is absolutely extreme and have nothing to balance it out on the other end. The reason why is because it's all about run distribution in the end. That's what it really is about, right? We can look at it as, we're distributing singles, doubles, triples, home runs, or even we're distributing walks and strikeouts, and we're distributing the outfield fly balls versus the singles and on the infield and all this other stuff, right? We can talk about all this stuff. We can talk about it left and right and talk about it until we go blue in the face. But in reality, what we do with these park factors is we redistribute runs. And if you do one defensively, I guess theoretically outs, but it's mostly runs that you're redistributing. I think of it sort of in terms of redistribution schemes that we see in real life, right? You think about, I don't know, taxation, which is, to some extent, can be a slight form of wealth redistribution, or one that we don't often think about is insurance. Now, I'm not here to talk economics or politics with you, but that's sort of the way that you've got to think about park factors. You've got to think about it in terms of, here is the number of runs that you have in a season overall, and it's not evenly balanced, so we want to make sure that we get enough into these certain pots to show that the ballpark had an effect, and we want to take some away from these other pots to make sure that the ballpark itself doesn't have that much an effect, right? So that's the whole question that I have, though, which is, can't you do that just using the statistics alone? Why also account for the ballpark? Now, it's a lot of fun to play a game in which you can tell you're in a different ballpark, right? But, how significant are the changes that we're talking about? Is it really something that is so significant that we would notice, right away playing the game that we need to have different, statistics that come out and things like that because, say, we're playing in Coors Field as opposed to the Astrodome? Is it so significant? Is the ballpark so significant that we absolutely have to put this in the game and yet also risk having other distortions? Another thing to think about, and I talk a lot about cross-era play here on the channel, is that when you take a ballpark out of one era and put it into another era, you run a lot of risk. You especially run the risk of making everything in your league go out of balance. And the reason why is, of course, obvious. It's because, the way that we look at ballpark factors is always dependent upon the year in which we are measuring it, right? If you take away the extra home runs that, say, Coors Field has, and you take away the Rockies from Coors Field, and you put them in the ballpark of, the 1906 White Sox, right, which is like an extreme pitcher's ballpark, which is one reason why I think it may be caused by the team, but that's another story for another day. You have to be very, very careful, right? Because you have to adjust for, the fact that the rest of the National League, if you just left them in that park, would be totally thrown off, right? This team with its offense would hit suddenly very well away from home, which may or may not have actually been the case if it were to happen. right? And I mean, if you're not, into figuring out some sort of formula by which you can redistribute the ballpark ratings and at least make it so they all even out, you're going to get some really weird distortions and some extraordinarily weird results. Similarly, if you put Coors Field in the 1908, you might have a team that suddenly is hitting all sorts of extra home runs all over the place. It won't really happen with Diamond Mine. It's not created to do that, and it's not extreme enough. But I think you can sort of catch my drift, which is that it's possible that ballpark factors are not really, I guess, they're not as precise, I think, as we would like them to be, especially for simulation purposes, right? One of the other problems that we have, of course, is that the way the ballparks really work and affect the game is not just in terms of runs or just in terms of singles, doubles, triples, home runs, and things like that, right? A lot of the effect that it has is a little bit more subtle, right? Some of the effect is not due to the park, but it's due to the air that you're playing in. I grew up in the Salt Lake City area. I know all about, the rarefied mountain air that you'll see in Colorado. You see it also in Salt Lake City when guys are hitting home runs left and right, and you're thinking, man, we're going to, all we do is hit home runs in this park. This is incredible. We have this incredible team with a bunch of power hitters, right? Again, it's the exact opposite of if you go to the Astrodome in 1979 or 1980 and you watch a game, their home runs are going to be extremely scarce, and the way that teams play adjusts for this, right? You'll see a lot more bunting, a lot more sort of desperation attempts to get a run across. The reason why is because your power game is mostly neutralized by the park, right? And I mean, it's not necessarily the case that the park says, well, we'll take a certain amount of doubles or a certain amount of triples away from you or whatever. It's whatever effect the park is having on that balance between pitching and hitting is being manifest in a certain way that we can sort of see when it comes to power hitting, or we can sort of see it when it comes to power pitching, right? But it's very, very difficult to know exactly what that difference is and to account for it the way that it should. And so I do think that there is really, in the end, kind of a good argument to be made that maybe you shouldn't mess around too much with park factors, or if you have them, you should do them pretty simple and pretty basic. I would argue that the more complicated your mechanism is, the greater the chances you're going to create massive distortions that are going to really hurt your game. Another thing, and this was, I know I mentioned yesterday, forum discussions and stuff like this, is one of the things that came up. Somebody was saying that the neutralization tool in out of the park baseball doesn't always account for park factors before players are neutralized, right? I mean, I don't know if it does or doesn't. I'm not part of the design team. I haven't really fiddled around with it a lot to see exactly what happens, right? But if that's the case, then that's a real problem, right? Because if you're using a game like that where you neutralize players and then you put them into different contexts and you don't neutralize them in accordance with the ratings for the ballpark that they played in originally, you're going to have a lot of problems, right? Especially if you're adding on ballpark ratings after the fact. Suddenly players are going to, seem really odd and seem off balance and not seem like themselves. Hence some of my complaints with out of the park baseball and the reason why a lot of simulation stats from that game seem off, right? I know I mentioned this before. I remember one replay comes to mind somebody did in the 1966 season, I think it was, and the Yankees won the AL pennant. If that happened in real life, that would have been a shocker, right? That was the year, wasn't that the year, or 65 or somewhere around that, when CBS took over and the team started to go into the toilet, right? Yeah, I mean, if they finished in first place, it'd be great, right, for New York Yankees fans, but I mean, that is a huge, huge divergence from history that right away makes you think there might be something off with this game, right? Or is there something off with the way that things are being calculated? So anyway, there you go. There's a couple thoughts on the subject. I welcome your thoughts below, especially if you disagree, right? My thoughts on the subject are still a little bit half-baked. I'm definitely not the sabermetric authority on park factors by any stretch of the imagination. I just think it's an interesting thing to talk about, and it's the sort of subject I wish we had more discussion around. And I wish we had more talking about this sort of stuff and less yelling at each other about war or about some guy's statistics, from like 20 years ago or whatever. So there you go. I'll talk with you again tomorrow. Bye.